The letter arrived like an unexpected storm, neatly folded, stamped with authority, and shoved under Byron Leach's front door. He picked it up, eyes narrowing at the familiar seal of the Lakeshore Meadows HOA, a name that once sounded safe, but now carried the weight of threat. Byron stood in his work boots, gloves still dusty from the garden, and unfolded the paper. It was cold, impersonal, and brutally precise. You are fined $1,200 for unauthorized water containment and aesthetic disruption. Remove all barrels from view within 10 days to avoid further penalties. He stared at it. Unauthorized water containment? As if collecting rainwater, a simple act of care, could be considered a crime. His blue barrels, lined neatly behind the fence, held the life of his garden, not a threat to anyone's manicured lawns. At the bottom, the signature glinted in cursive, a name he'd learned to dread: Gloria Penwell, HOA President. Byron let out a slow breath and leaned against the porch railing, taking in the small paradise he'd built, rows of tomatoes, the peach tree he'd nurtured since his wife passed, and the barrels of spring water from the creek behind his house. The water wasn't city water, it wasn't stolen, it was life itself. Later, his neighbor Harold Denton ambled over. "Got one too?" Harold asked, nodding at the letter. "No, just me," Byron replied. Harold frowned. "She's been looking for someone to make an example of," Harold said. Byron simply nodded. "I'm not hurting anyone, just keeping the garden alive." That night, Byron sat at his kitchen table, the letter spread before him, Mocha, his cat, purring beside him. Memories of his late wife, Leah, flickered, how she'd teased him that he'd find peace in soil and sunlight. Byron had spent years tending his garden through droughts, storms, and now bureaucratic threats. The creek behind his yard gurgled faintly, a reminder of what was natural and right. The HOA had diverted part of it underground, leaving wetlands dry and cracked. He'd never voiced his frustration, but the sight always haunted him. Nature was patient, but it never forgot. Over the next days, Byron endured the HOA's scrutiny. Complaints were filed, letters stacked on his table. Gloria herself inspected his yard, clipboard in hand, criticizing the barrel's color and visibility. Byron calmly explained that the water was collected legally and used responsibly. "Rules apply equally," she insisted. Byron had seen the HOA bend rules for others, gazebos built without permits, brightly painted shutters, yet here his barrels suddenly became a matter of principle. It wasn't just a battle over water, it was about control. Byron didn't fight with words. He fought with patience and understanding. He observed, mapped, and planned. He dusted off old forestry maps, tracing the creek's original path before human interference rerouted it for aesthetics. Then he acted. Patiently, carefully, he dug channels to restore the creek's natural flow, guiding the water back to where it had belonged decades ago. Not sabotage, restoration. The rain came, steady and relentless, filling the barrels and creeks alike. Byron's quiet work allowed nature to reclaim its course. By the next morning, HOA lawns were flooded, flower beds submerged, the decorative pond turned muddy. Members scurried, cameras flashing, blaming everything but themselves. Byron sipped coffee, calm, watching the scene from a distance. Gloria arrived, soaked and furious. "Did you tamper with the creek?" she demanded. "I didn't do anything," Byron said evenly. "I just let it run where it wanted. Nature handled the rest." The fine, the threats, meaningless now. Byron hadn't defied the HOA. He had simply restored balance. Word spread faster than the flood itself. Neighbors picked sides. Some saw him as reckless, others as a quiet hero. Byron's calm refusal to bow to unnecessary rules reshaped the community's perspective. By the end, Lakeshore Meadows was forever changed. A single man and the creek had reminded everyone who really held the power: nature, patience, and quiet resolve. Byron sat on his porch, Mocha by his side, watching the water flow freely. Not with triumph, but with peace. Byron Leach had faced the HOA's wrath before, but never like this. The fine for his barrels of spring water wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about authority, control, and, unbeknownst to him, a quiet reckoning brewing beneath the surface of Lakeshore Meadows. Over the next several days, the letters multiplied. Each arrived with sharper wording, heavier paper, a tone designed to intimidate. Byron read them carefully, not out of fear, but to understand the bureaucracy he faced. The HOA's language was cold, precise, almost surgical, but it failed to account for the life contained in those barrels, the quiet ecosystem of his backyard. He looked around at the rows of tomato plants, the peach tree that had become a living memory of his late wife Leah, and the soft soil that held 1,000 memories of his care. "They can't see this," he muttered to himself. "They only see rules on paper." Harold Denton, his neighbor and friend, kept visiting, offering small comforts, sodas, a nod of understanding, a shrug when words weren't enough. "You're right," Harold said one evening, sitting on Byron's porch. "But people like Gloria don't care about reason. They care about power." Byron nodded silently. The more he observed the neighborhood, the more he realized the HOA's obsession wasn't with uniformity. It was with control. Fences, mailboxes, flowers, they were just symbols. Symbols that he unintentionally had challenged. In the evenings, Byron would sit by the creek, flashlight in hand, mapping the water's natural flow. It had been diverted underground, piped through metal channels to keep lawns tidy and walking paths dry. But the creek remembered. The wetlands behind his fence, cracked and brittle, whispered of what had been lost. And Byron listened. He started small, moving soil here, nudging the water there. Each motion was deliberate, measured, restoring a path nature had been. Dean Lovett, one of the HOA's vice presidents, approached with polite caution. "Byron, maybe just paint the barrels beige," he suggested, trying to find a compromise. Byron smiled faintly. "Peace is easy when one person always gives in. I'm not giving in this time." By Friday, the full weight of the HOA's control met the water's unstoppable will. Rain poured, filling the creek beyond its restricted path, spilling into manicured lawns, drowning the ornamental pond, and submerging flower beds. Members ran, shouting orders, snapping photos, blaming weather, neighbors, the city, but never themselves. Byron sipped coffee quietly, watching the chaos. Gloria appeared, drenched and furious. "Did you tamper with the creek?" she demanded. Byron shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I just let it flow. The fine? The threats?" They meant nothing now. Byron hadn't broken rules. He had restored balance. Word of the flood and Byron's quiet defiance spread like wildfire. The neighborhood divided. Some loyal to Gloria, terrified of challenging authority. Others quietly supported Byron, admiring his patience, his resolve, his unshakable calm. Conversations on porches, in emails, across fences. Everyone had an opinion. But Byron stayed distant, watching, observing. He worked with the creek over the following days, reinforcing channels, adjusting flow, ensuring nature's course wasn't interrupted. Each drop of water was a lesson in patience and timing. Every puddle that found its way to old wetlands reminded the community what it had lost under strict regulations. By the next storm, Byron's planning showed its brilliance. Water flowed naturally, nourishing his garden, replenishing dry patches, and redistributing to previously neglected areas. Gloria's ornamental lawns couldn't resist nature's design. The HOA's control, rigid and paper-bound, crumbled quietly under the force of patience. No. Byron woke to the crackle of rain hitting his roof. The storm hadn't let up. The creek behind his house gushed with renewed energy. He stood at the edge of his property, watching the water surge along the channel he had carefully restored. It was alive again, reclaiming its natural path. The HOA had posted another notice on the community board. Non-compliance could lead to fines or legal action. Everyone in Lakeshore Meadows knew exactly who it was about. But Byron wasn't worried. He'd spent decades working with water and land. He knew patience and understanding always outlasted rigid authority. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the wet soil. Mocha padded at his heels, curious about the sudden rush of water. He examined the flow and smiled faintly. "You're doing exactly what you should," he whispered to the creek, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with the water itself. Across the street, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, murmuring anxiously. Some whispered approval, others muttered fears of HOA retribution. Byron ignored them. He had no intention of arguing or bending to threats. He only wanted the land and the water to breathe freely again. By mid-morning, water had spread past the creek's previous boundaries, filling small depressions and low spots, saturating soil that had been parched for years. Byron watched as droplets slid over leaves, feeding thirsty plants, reviving forgotten patches of earth. The sound of water rushing through his carefully shaped channels was almost musical, and for a moment he felt Leah's presence beside him. Byron had already begun reinforcing the natural flow, moving small mounds of earth to guide water without forcing it, letting gravity and terrain do the work. Each movement was methodical, a delicate dance between man and nature. Suddenly, Harold appeared, umbrella in hand, boots muddy. "This is amazing," he said, marveling at the torrent of life flowing across Byron's property. "You really did it. Look at it move." Byron nodded, a small smile on his lips. "It was never about me. It's always been about them." He gestured to the creek, now full and vibrant, and making sure they had their freedom back. Meanwhile, Gloria Penwell was already on site with several HOA members. Cameras, clipboards, and raincoats made her look like a general inspecting a battlefield. She stormed toward Byron's property, water dripping from her meticulously styled hair, her expression tight with fury. "Mr. Leach," she called, "did you deliberately cause this flooding?" Byron turned slowly, standing in the mud, calm as ever. "I didn't cause anything. I just let the creek follow its path. Nature decided where it wanted to go." Her voice shook, half disbelief, half rage. "You'll be held accountable. Association property has been damaged." Byron's gaze swept over the flooded lawns, the saturated flower beds, and the overflowing pond. "What's damaged," he said softly, "was already broken. I only helped it heal." Some HOA members murmured among themselves, unsure whether to back her up. The volunteers snapping photos hesitated as they noticed the natural beauty emerging amidst the chaos. Ducks had returned to the pond, plants thrived in the newly watered soil, and the creek sparkled in the morning light. Byron didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply watched as the chaos of authority confronted the inevitability of nature. Slowly, he heard whispers among the neighbors. People who had once feared Gloria now admired his patience. Some muttered words like brave and wise. Others simply nodded in silent agreement, acknowledging the quiet rebellion that had restored life to the land. The storm continued, but Byron's channels guided the water with precision, preventing any real damage to structures while revitalizing the natural ecosystem. By the afternoon, even Gloria had to pause, standing drenched, fists clenched, unable to deny the result. You let it run its course?" she stammered. "Yes," Byron replied, voice calm. "And in doing so, everything is exactly where it should be." The tension was palpable. HOA members whispered among themselves. For the first time, the unquestioned authority of Lakeshore Meadows wavered under the simple truth that some things, like water, like nature, cannot be controlled by letters, fines, or rules. By evening, the rain eased, leaving behind a transformed backyard and a community forced to confront the limits of their control. Neighbors began conversations, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Some expressed admiration for Byron, others begged and questioning the HOA's rigid policies. The quiet man with the barrels had become a symbol of patience, respect for nature, and the subtle power of standing one's ground. Byron sat on his porch, coffee in hand, mocha curled at his feet. The water ran freely in the creek, birds returned to the newly revitalized trees, and the community's dynamics had quietly shifted. He smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. The HOA had tried to impose authority. Byron had answered with calm, knowledge, and the unstoppable force of nature. And in the end, it was clear who truly held power in Lakeshore Meadows.